You walk into a glass-walled boardroom full of people in tailored suits, push a janitor cart, and for 3 sentences straight, they laugh at you. Loud, practiced laughter, the kind that makes you feel smaller by design. That's the hook right there, because what they don't know is you built the place they're mocking, and you came back to watch what happens when leadership forgets why the company ever mattered. Hi, I'm telling you this story because it's messy, it's real, and it's the kind of thing that sticks with you long after the applause dies. Yeah, that happened. Act 1. The Return. Marcus Reed used to be the guy people called a visionary. He started Meridian Labs in a rented storage unit coded late into the night, convinced a few stubborn investors, and grew something that 10 years later looked like every tech magazine cover. He stepped back when he wanted to let new leaders run the day-to-day. Not because he didn't care, but because he believed systems could stand without his shadow. Then the rumors started. Quiet ones at first, whispers about promotions that never happened. HR reports, misplaced, a pattern that didn't add up. So Marcus did something that made his old board and new executives choke on their coffee. He came back as Martin, a maintenance worker with a faded uniform, a cart, and a pair of hands that still remembered the feel of solder and server racks. He chose the low lane on purpose, not for drama, but to see the company without filters, to watch how decisions were actually made when the cameras were off and the suits relaxed. You meet Mark Ellis, Chief Financial Officer Silver, in the hair razor in the tongue. Mark's the kind of executive who measures everything by margins and market reactions, who calls diversity externalities that nibble at the bottom line. Then there's Claire Bennett, the CEO, polished, well-coached, the face investors like to see. And Rosa Alvarez, in HR, who's been trying to keep the small leaks from becoming full-blown sinkholes, documenting things in a tablet that looks like one more administrative habit but is actually a quiet ledger of consequences. Marcus rolls his cart through the lobby with a smile. Nobody remembers meaning anything but service, and he watches. At first, it's petty stuff, a dropped napkin that everyone watches him bend to pick up a joke about not overstepping your place. The room shakes with laughter like a title uniform. But the jokes become blueprints. In the executive dining room, Mark openly says they should streamline the new acquisition by cutting employee resource groups, trim the PR fluff that costs money. And Claire, who sat on the founding mission with one hand and a calendar with the other, nods, then moves on. That nod is the thing that settles in Marcus's chest like a stone. Act 2. The Reveal. The decision about Emberly Tech's acquisition is supposed to be technical. Numbers, integration plans, synergy, charts. But the air in that conference room thickens into something personal. Marcus wheels his cart in on a weekday afternoon when the big projections are on the screen and Mark is flamboyant, pointing at red and blue lines like they're the end of a story, he wrote. Marcus is invisible, collecting cups and clearing crumbs until Mark drops a stack of papers a little too theatrically, then rails at Martin. Can't you do anything right? In front of the whole table. The laughter follows sharp and coordinated like a drumbeat. That's the moment Marcus decides the experiment is over. He could have left. He could have sent an anonymous report, another of those PDFs that disappear into compliance inboxes. Instead, he does what founders rarely do. He sits down at the table he was never invited to and speaks. Not angrily, not theatrically, just the way someone who's read the numbers would: precise, calm, devastating. He points out 3 errors in Mark's projections that alone are enough to collapse the valuation-assumed synergies that don't exist. Underestimated integration costs, written like wishful thinking, and a misread of Emberly's debt schedule that would saddle Meridian with hidden liabilities. People laugh, then the room tightens like a fist. Mark tries to scorn him. Maybe you read the financial press between mopping duties. But Marcus doesn't flinch. He leaves a card in Rosa's tablet folder, not with a janitor company logo, but with his real name and the fact that he's the majority shareholder. Rosa's fingers pause. Her eyes widen. She's been quietly tracking incidents for months. The demotions dressed as fit issues. The review scores edited after complaints, the patterns marked as performance problems. She closes a door, shows him her notes, and says, "This is worse than I thought." That's the pivot. Emotional, legal, strategic. Marcus calls Priya Shah his longtime attorney and she snaps awake out of a routine afternoon. They prepare audited ledgers, HR logs, witness statements. Marcus doesn't want vengeance, he wants proof. Proof is what unglues privilege when charm and power have been the glue. There are scenes that feel cinematic. Marcus changing from a janitor's jacket into a suit in a car parked 2 blocks away, walking into an executive floor where security does a double take. Mark watching security footage of the maintenance guy sweating over a phone that reveals more than one image. The same face at the boardroom table, the same hand that brushed papers on a screen. Internally, Mark starts to scramble his alliances, but alliances built on favors tend to be brittle when light hits them. Rosa gathers a handful of employees in a back office. James, an analyst who got ignored. Zoe, a product manager who was always told, not the right fit. A handful more with stories that sound common but add up to extraordinary. They hand over testimonies and records. Marcus sits in those rooms and listens, and you can hear in his silence the accumulation of every micro-injustice he's ever seen. It hardens resolve into action. Act 3. The confrontation and aftermath. The next morning, there's an emergency meeting. The board files in murmurs like an animal waking. Marcus walks in not as Martin, not as a rumor. He sits at the head of the table. He presents documentation video clips of mocking executives' audio of directives to fix diversity programs, timeline after timeline of buried complaints. Claire, who had accepted the benefit of the doubt posture for so long, stands up and says something that will echo, "I failed you by staying silent." That admission rearranges the room. Mark lunges, of course. He throws up the usual defenses. This is management style. We prioritized shareholder value. You can't just record private conversations, but the record is thick. HR logs, policy clauses about monitored common areas, emails with directives, and the board's demeanor changes. People who once laughed have to look at each other and weigh the cost of loyalty versus the cost of ignoring truth. Marcus announces actions. Mark is removed pending investigation, an independent audit of HR and promotion practices, protected reporting channels, and binding inclusion metrics tied to executive compensation. He forces a choice that was always there but hidden, money or conscience. The victory is messy. The stock dips, pundits shout, some investors murmur about lost efficiency. But within months, Meridian stabilizes. The talent that left returns not because of slogans, but because policies now have teeth and transparency. The most cinematic part isn't the firing or the headlines. It's watching Zoe sign her promotion letter without caveats, seeing James pull a model out of a drawer that actually gets used, watching Rosa walk through the office with the weight lifting off her shoulders because the ledger of shame is now a roadmap for repair. Marcus doesn't gloat. He walks, floors, sits with teams, still sometimes puts on a maintenance jacket to sweep with the night crew because leadership is not a pedestal. It's an obligation. But the ending refuses to be neat. Mark sells the story to conservative commentators who frame him as a martyr of shareholder value. Others call Marcus a vigilante who skirted corporate norms. There's debate. Was Marcus right to go undercover to record and present? Did he bend rules to catch other rules being broken? Those questions are important because they force us to choose actively what we value. I'm not here to tell you who's morally perfect in this story. People are complicated. But I will tell you what matters. Cultures that permit small cruelties become cultures that permit larger harms. And sometimes accountability needs unusual methods to breathe through bureaucracy. So here's the part where I want you in the room with me. Not as a spectator, but as someone who decides what stories get amplified. Have you ever watched someone be dismissed, ignored, or humiliated at work and thought someone should do something? Did someone tell us in the comments? Do you think Marcus was justified in going undercover, or was there a better path? What counts more to you in leadership? Quarterly returns, or the kind of workplace where people actually want to stay? Drop your experience below, argue your side, be honest, be specific, And if you felt this hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to see it. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe because these are the kinds of true messy moments that change companies. Sometimes communities, sometimes whole industries. One last thing. If you ever feel small in a room full of big suits, remember evidence is louder than mockery, and history has a way of listening.